I'm Scott Allen Miller. This is Sheep Guarding Llama, and it is the 1st of January, 2020. Welcome to the 2020s. This is pretty cool. It is the start of a new decade. You only get to say this a few times in your life. I did get to live through the, welcome to the new millennium in 2000, which was, I don't know, not really interesting. It's just a number. But it struck me today that a couple things. One, 100 years ago today is when the Roaring Twenties started. Like the Roaring Twenties, exactly 100 years ago. That's kind of interesting to think about. It is also, so the 1920s were the beginning of the cool decades. Up until the 1920s, it was like, it's just, people didn't really worry about decades. I mean, I'm sure they did at the time, but like looking back at it, it's all just muddled together. The 1880s, 1890s, 1900s, even the 1910s wasn't really that interesting. Yeah, the Great War happened, and like planes were invented, and like things happened, and in the combustion engine. So one decade had cars, one decade had planes, one decade had world wars. Okay, like we'll give them, like, each decade had something kind of neat going on, but the decades themselves don't have like an iconic long-term century later, like, oh yeah, the 1910s, that was, people did this thing. No, people dressed the same, talked the same, acted the same, thought the same, broadly, for a long period of time. 1920s, that changed. The Roaring Twenties stand out as being musically, culturally, just all around different than what came just before them. And the 1930s, dramatically different than the 20s. The 40s, pretty different than the 30s, although the 40s are more related to the 30s than most other decades are to each other, but that's World War II kind of causes that to happen. But the 1940s have the World War. So even though they were like the 1930s, with the war starting right at the beginning of 1940, like the 1930s, so like beginning of 1940, even though the culture was very similar, everything we think of as World War II, all of that happened in the 40s. So the 30s were like the Depression, and then the same culture, the war, right? And then 1950 began the pop centuries, the pop decades, right? The 1950s with their, Elvis and Chuck Berry and like the old iconic rock and roll, which is really country if you think about it, or country's really rock, whatever. You had that like clean cut, doo-wop, like 1950s, right? Like Happy Days and the Korean War. The 1960s started all the crazy stuff, right? Like the world lost their mind, the Beatles, you had like pop, like we think of it kind of today, sort of got started. Music went out the window. It was all about marketing. Everything was bright colors. Like the 1950s, we kind of picture in black and white. The 1960s, we do not, right? The 1960s are boom color. 1970s, disco and all the bizarre stuff going on in the 1970s, drug fueled everything, which of course started in the 1960s. Things overlap, but the 1970s stand out as being very, very different than the 1960s. Watching films in the 60s, Bikini Beach Bingo and all kinds of stuff. Beach Blanket Bingo, that's its name. And in the 1970s was Star Wars. Like things were very different, right? We have these iconic decades. And then the 1980s, who can miss the 1980s, right? They were crazy. They were John Hughes films and the new bubblegum pop that defined the era. Electronic music, rock had pretty much died. Not that we didn't have pop, but pop completely supplanted rock as the primary music. Now, of course, the 1990s kind of managed to hold on with its own identity, but it's so different in the way that it changed compared to previous decades that it's actually hard to identify it. But I think that there is a pretty strong identity, and especially musically, it became the decade of country music. Now, actually, country had passed pop in the 1980s, and people didn't realize it because of the way music was reported. It's something that even now it's a little bit hard to research. But the 1990s is like Garth Brooks and all that kind of stuff happened in the 90s. And so the 90s had like this weird vibe, but by the later, like in the early 90s, it was kind of carrying on from the 80s, and by the late 90s it kind of just blended into the 2000s of bleh, right? And the thing about the decades ended, so it really lasted from about 1920 to about the late 90s. You had roughly 75 to 80 years of this really amazing each decade very carefully defined by whatever thing was going on causing it to happen. So that it was 100 years ago that started, and we've watched it end, right? Having lived through the death of the decade definitions, is interesting, right? So anyway, that was one thing that was really interesting. Also interesting for me is that NTG, the company that I founded in 1999, is now 21 years old, which obviously is not a major level. It's kind of like, wow, this company's old enough to drink. That's interesting. And it's neat being that we're more than 20, right? When you're like, we're 20 years old, which is what we've been for the last year, it sounds like you're really struggling. But when you're at 21, it's like, we're over 20. Like, we're just in the big numbers now. Who cares? But probably the most interesting time landmark for me this year, specifically because of my audience right now, is that this blog, the written form at least, and not the video, obviously, celebrates 20 years of blogging this year. We started in February of 2000, and I regret not having started 2 years earlier. I really think starting around 94 would have been, even better. Obviously, the more you have, the better it is. But somewhere around 97, 98 is when I really wish I had the daily blog. That would have been amazing to be able to look back at that era, because just before I started blogging so I started in 2000. I managed to start weeks before I moved away from Rochester, New York, where I grew up. Not for the first time, but the last time, right? I never really moved back. But like all of the starting the company, the whole first year is gone. And there was a lot of struggle, right, that year, but it was an interesting year. And all of my being a professional guitarist, all of my big trombone stuff, all of my real, at least interesting college years, all of my after college, like figuring out career years, all of my re-gearing to come into IT years, like all of that stuff, which was pretty interesting and intense. That stuff, it's lost. I mean, I kind of remember it, but, it would be really nice to have that written down, and have to respond to somebody, and it really would be nice if I had that. I wish I did. But, so to anyone else who's thinking about blogging, the one thing you'll regret the most is not doing it or putting it off. The sooner you do it, the more you get, the more meaningful it is for the long haul. And so, yeah, 20 years though. 20 years of blogging. Now, this past year, it's been tough, and I'm trying to get back to the blogging. I've really struggled with it this year, and that's why I started doing the video blog at pretty close to every day, because this is much easier for me when I can do it. But many times I can't. I literally don't get the time in a day to make a recording, and that really sucks. And I'm trying to figure out how to do that better. And like now I'm doing it at night because it's the only chance that I get. I like being able to sit outside and do it with natural light, and it looks, it looks better, and it kind of comes across better. And I want to do that more. But I need to just do this, right? If I can't do that sometime during the day, I need to make the time and just say, I'm going to turn on the lights, do it at night. And this isn't bad. And actually the sound is pretty good for this. So that's what I need to do. So today's January 1st. So I'll get to what's happening right now in just a little bit. Today is the first day of 2020. It is normally a holiday, but I try to give the team holidays off, which I say in all these videos, right? But if you're not following along, so I worked today thinking I was just gonna do some catch up and like it wouldn't be too bad, but it turned out there was just so much to do. We had an employee who had a family emergency, so he was actually the one that was going to be working today, and I was just like helping out to like get more done. He ended up having to leave early in the morning. Well, not early, but during the morning. So I ended up covering for him all day, and then obviously with Vetastic doing so much, I worked for several hours on that today, and then it wasn't until about 11 o'clock tonight that I was able to actually jump on doing the projects that I was trying to start doing when I first got up this morning, which sucks, right? So It's just been a day of running from thing to thing, but it's been a really productive day. Dominica and the kids are coming back tomorrow morning. Well, they're leaving about 9, so we'll see them in the middle of the afternoon. So they'll be back. So tomorrow I want to be able to see the kids. So hopefully I'll get enough done tonight and tomorrow morning. But I pretty much just started working the moment I got up, which was a little bit late, right? Like I've been doing late nights, so I got up around 10, and then just went straight to the computer and have not left my desk all day. I didn't leave to eat. I ate while I worked, like literally typing while I ate my egg McMuffin sandwiches, and that was my day, right? Just complete work. And I'm recording this at about 1:45 in the morning. There's just nothing to report today other than I worked like crazy. But it's been good. I got some project stuff moving along well that I was concerned wasn't getting done. That's always a big thing for me, right? Like I get so swamped that the big things start getting behind, and then I start getting stressed out because I can't get to them, and then it gets harder to get to them, and then I need more sleep because I'm stressed out, and then it's even harder to get to them. And so getting chances like this where I get lots of days to sit down and focus and do nothing but work on stuff, and then finally get to those projects are really important. And so today seems to have been one of those days that even though I got slammed with just this crazy amount of stuff, I'm actually managing to get to some of those things. And I feel much better now having at least something of that done. So I really didn't get to see anybody today. Paul's here. Mia sat in the chair behind me a lot of the day. Paul left at some point. He did go shopping, got some groceries, just a little bit, because we're out of coffee. Like that's how much coffee I've been drinking. And then he went out and shot pool at some point, afternoon, evening. I don't know. He kind of popped in as like, hey, I'm going to go shoot pool. Then he leaves, and he pops in and goes, hey, I'm going to go to bed. And then he leaves. And then he and the dog disappear. All those things were hours and hours and hours ago. I haven't left my desk. Like nothing has changed. And then just a few minutes ago at about 1:45, Rachel just texted me and said she wants to watch Coupling or The Mandalorian. So she's on her way over now. I am going to keep working until she gets here. But that's, I'm going to go watch some TV and run back and forth between the couch and here to keep working. And that is the first day of 2020. But my goal this year is to keep up on the blog. For those of you who are watching this and actually don't know the blog, it's simply sheepguardingllama.com. And I'm going to try really hard to keep the videos coming every day because I think this is a really great format. Even though no one's commenting, please comment, like, subscribe. You know, I mean, this is not exactly a channel that I'm intending to monetize or like, you know, but hey, this is an interesting thing, I think, that not very many people do daily vlogs, and certainly with Sheep Guarding Llama being 20 years old and as far as I know, the longest single author written work in human history, you know, I think this is a pretty cool addendum to that. Like this is, I hope at some point in the future, so you know, who do I do this for? As January 1st, 2020, this is a great day to say, who do I do this for? Why? Well, for one, I do this for me, right? This is the recap of my life, and this is a chance for me to record what's going on so that when I want to look back someday, I can. And that may sound crazy. Like, of course, you're not going to look back and look at all this. You're going to die first, and it's all going to be there. And what did you do it for? It's not really true. I do look back, at least on the written Sheep Guarding Llama, all the time. It's an unbelievably good resource for like, hey, think about all these times in your life where you're like, when's the last time I watched this movie? When did we go to that thing? When did we, blah, blah. It's things you want to know about life. You're in constant conversation. Well, I can look it up and figure those things out for everything, right? And that's wonderful. Making these videos actually makes it easier to write the blog because I can record things quickly and then write them up as I have time. So I'm hoping that this will help with that. But I also do this as kind of my daily catch up to my dad because we don't have much time because my schedule is so crazy. It's not like I can hop on the phone and talk because I get up and work until everyone has gone to bed pretty much all the time. And if I get a moment to not do that, I'm hanging out with the kids, right? So I don't have time to jump on the phone. I don't have much time to text people. My days are absolutely crazy. And this year with Vetastic going gangbusters from at least a development perspective, you know, I'm putting in between 5 and 7 hours of on the phone with Jeremy working every day, right? For like 2 weeks straight, we it's like an full day of work after we've done full days of work, right? And so my schedule has become that I basically don't get to sleep, but for good reasons, not because I'm stressed out. This is really interesting things happen, and so I'm really excited that I'm doing these videos, and this time around with a new company, there's going to be this really great, like, what was going on in life as these things happened, because we missed that with NTG. And of course I'm glad that 20 years of NTG have been, chronicled, but with Fantastic, with Quixotic, that stuff, yeah, some stuff has happened in the past. We missed a little bit, but maybe I'll cover more of that in a upcoming video. But we didn't really miss much. Now the real stuff's happening. It's all the really interesting early days. Those are happening now. Unfortunately, when I did 20 years ago with Sheep Guarding Llama, a lot of the really good getting started stuff kind of didn't get written down, right? A lot of that is missing, and that really sucks that I was not very diligent about it. And I didn't know what to write. I didn't know how much I could write. I didn't know how to write. I didn't have the time to write. So it's very sporadic in the early days, and now that's changed, right? So it's not just that I lost the first year, it's that the next 2 years were just kind of meh. And I really regret that, because it was a really important part of my life. But we're going to fix that this time around. And it's really tough that, I have kids now, and this past 2 years have been so hard. I don't like missing time to document stuff that's going on with them. It's even more important. But so anyway, this is kind of my daily message to my father, because it's the time that we have to catch up. And of course, like, my sister-in-law reads this from time to time. She likes to catch up with what's going on with the family. Hi, Francesca, if you're watching this, which you're probably not, because there's only 23 people subscribed, but maybe someday. And then really big, though, is for Liesel and Luciana, because someday, right, I'm going to be gone, and this is going to be their opportunity to go back and look and say, learn more about me, and to find out what was going on in their lives, because I really don't have a good picture of what was going on when I was their ages, right? I can kind of remember. It's very fuzzy. Dad can tell me things, but it's 40 years later. They'll be able to go back and go, wow, well, that's what he looked like back then. Sometimes they're in the video. I write about them. They're going to be able to go back and read and watch and really recreate what was going on in their lives in a way that pretty much nobody can, right? So it's really big for them. And of course, when they have kids someday, right, this is going to be an interesting archaeological archive of a relative who has this. I would love if I had something like this for, my parents, my grandparents, my great-great-great-great-great-grandparents, right? Imagine if family from the 1600s had done something like this, right? Here we are on the boat coming over to, the New Netherlands colony, and here's the story of our lives, and why we had kids when we did, and why we decided to go on the boat, and how we struggled to eat the first year, and how our careers developed, and where we moved, and what we did, and what we thought, and what we like to eat. Like, that would be so amazing to be able to look back on, and it's missing. And nobody does this for their great grandkids. Well, I am, right? Here it is. This is going to be an archive that exists for them in a way that just nobody else has. So I hope that there are my kids watching this, and their kids, and their kids, and their kids' kids. I'm sure they won't watch all of it or read all of it, but they'll have access to it, and it'll be something that they can look at and say, wow, I'm 43 years old. I wonder what my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was thinking on New Year's when he was 43 years old. And here it will be, this video that they can come back and watch. And I'm saying hello to future generations from the year 2020. This is, I was thinking about how this was going to be used far down the road, and I hope that it turns out to be valuable to be able to see this insight, because you go back in history, and the few people who did diaries like this became very important in the future. Not that they became very important, that the fact that they did it was very important, and it was very useful. So welcome to 2020. Join me on the next 20 years of the Sheep Guarding Llama experience, and someday maybe I'll do a video on why we call it that. Really, this is just the Scott Allen Miller diary, right? But I call it Sheep Guarding Llama because you need to be able to search for things on the internet.